Welcome to CGT Square Talk, where top experts in the industry share their groundbreaking journeys. Brought to you by Blue Squared, your strategic digital partner.
Andy.
Hey guys.
Hey man, how are you?
Good, Anthony. How are you?
Pretty good. How are you feeling?
I'm getting better, but I'm still gonna have a bit of a nasally voice, and I may
Just a
cough or
little.
sneeze in the middle of this whole thing.
Not too bad.
Hi,
Andy.
Hi.
I don't
Good to
think you
meet
guys
you.
have ever met, right?
No, I don't think so.
Armin,
First time.
Andy, Armin.
Norman, hi. Nice to meet you.
Hey, good to meet you.
Andy is.
You
well,
guys
if you
have
don't know,
microphones and professional setups and everything.
we do. Yeah. Well, we're trying. Well, thanks for coming, and for Armin. I don't know how much you know about Andy, but Andy is quite the innovator, actually. I think in the space. I know he scoffs or laughs about that, but we've done a few kind of interesting projects together. Everything from like an iOS app to a couple of other things. So I'm
Proofs of
quite
concept
excited
that
to.
I still
Some,
hope we'll get some traction sometime.
so actually, maybe what we can start with is a little bit of your journey, how you got to Cell and Gene, what drives you about being in the space.
Yeah, sure. So, you know, career turns often just are luck, right? So I was actually working in a couple of startups, both of which this was in like mid to when was this? Let's call it the mid teens of the 2000s, right? And so,
Mm-hmm.
or actually the early teens, and they both failed as startups do. And so I was kind of between jobs, and then I went to work for a consulting company and then got like my first gig with this consulting firm was at Novartis right when they were really starting the ramp up of the launch of Kymriah. So I got into the team about a year before Kymriah was launched, which is the first CAR T therapy commercially approved anywhere.
Wow.
And that was quite a journey. And I spent 4 years there, basically as the product owner of the orchestration platform and building over 3 iterations an orchestration platform to control the global business, and then spent a lot of time with the commercial team on the rollout to all the countries after we launched the 2 indications for Kymriah.
Mm-hmm.
In the US, we then pivoted to the rest of the world and went through quite a number of country launches, major markets, the EU, of course, and Japan, Hong Kong, Singapore, Australia. So, yeah, quite an experience, which then got me quite embedded and very deep into this sort of a deep but very narrow subject matter expertise in the cell and gene therapy space.
Right.
And
Well, you
yeah,
do a lot of. You're the head of supply chain,
yeah.
obviously, but do you focus mostly on systems or?
Right now, I've pivoted into a role where I'm head of product for cell and gene therapies at was the head of supply chain. I'm still very much involved in the supply chain organization.
So that's a new
It's a new role.
position.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, congratulations. We may
Thank you.
have to bleep out the company name later, but
Yeah, that's fine.
that's fine.
Sorry. Yeah.
No worries.
But throughout my career, I've always if you look at a theme in my career, it's always been to how do you leverage technology to make all this stuff work. So I worked in manufacturing operations, my first iteration through the current company. This is the second time I've been here, and did a lot of work to automate what we were doing there. I've worked on e-commerce platforms for sort of like a B2C model of a B2B type platform for selling to sort of second tier customers, in a business to business type of environment. I've been in multiple SAP projects. So I've always looked at how to use technology to just make everything work more efficiently.
And so you've had a one POC around chain of identity that was kind of cool on an iOS system, and of course we worked together on an
Mm-hmm.
iOS app.
Yeah,
Both of which I thought were kind
it
of
was
very
fun.
innovative, actually. Yeah, a lot of
And again,
fun.
I still hope we can our portfolio's changed. The focus of what we need has changed a little bit, but I still see an opportunity to leverage that when we get, and the therapy that we were designing for specifically has kind of been parked a little bit, and we've pivoted to some other things. But there's still an application there for it. I
Right.
think the concept of being able to just scan the package and then get a lot of very detailed information about what it is, given the complexity of the therapies that we're putting out into the world, I think there's still a use case for that. So I'm
Yeah.
hoping we can get some traction for that coming in the future.
So that's very
Hopefully we will.
interesting you say that. So you talk about these systems and that are in the landscape, the entire landscape. What would be the major challenges that you think that when you're implementing these systems within the landscape?
Yeah, I think, one of the things I've been thinking about recently as we're moving. So in our current business, we have a pretty interesting portfolio of products, and they're all in different stages. We have products that are preclinical, and we have a product that has launched commercially, and we have everything in between. So second, like uh, um, phase 2, moving into phase 3, commercial launch. But a big theme of the space, the cell and gene therapy space, is it's still extremely immature and it's extremely fragmented. And everybody is still learning daily how best to operationalize these types of therapies. And so when a business is really immature, that means nobody really knows what they're doing. And so there's a need to put systems in place, but we have to be careful about not constraining ourselves with these systems. So, and what I mean by that is that, like, when I was at Novartis, um, we designed the system to control the process end to end. And it was part of what we demonstrated to the FDA to show that we do have this process under control. We know where the product's going. It can only go to licensed hospitals. It can only be the product that gets ordered. It controls the chain of identity, which for autologous therapies is absolutely crucial. But we built some capabilities into that system that really locked down what you could do. And then as the product started to mature and we needed to change some things about how we administered the product to patients, the systems really became barriers to being able to do that. And it became really difficult to, it became expensive to modify the system to accommodate the new way of doing something. In this case,
Right.
dosing. And that just couldn't have been foreseen because we started out with a spec that said, a single dose and the dose is fixed. And
So
over time,
flexibility
that
is
changed. And so if you design the system for a single dose and a fixed dose, and then it becomes potentially more than one dose, or it's not fixed, there's some, dose optimization, we called it, and the system was built not to support that, it becomes, in a validated world with, very controlled pharmaceutical products, that's difficult to overcome. So
Yeah. So flexibility is super important, right? The ability to, because science changes, processes change, and you got to
yeah,
be able to adapt the system rather
I think
quickly to be
I
able
think
to
don't get
accommodate them.
too, like, you make sure you design flexibility into the system,
Yeah.
where so, obviously you want things configurable, not coded if possible.
Right.
Mhm.
So do you think the challenge is the same whether you're at a large pharma or a smaller one?
Um, I think the only difference is it's unlikely at a small pharma that you're actually going to get to a commercial launch. So your
Mhm.
focus is mainly on how do we just make this happen for phase 1 and phase 2, and then we're going to partner with somebody to actually take it commercially. Now,
For
that's
phase
not every
3.
company. I mean, some of the big names in the cell and gene space started out as startups and are big names in the cell and gene space, although every single one of them that's commercial has been acquired. So you kind
Right.
of assume that that progression is going to happen. You have a discovery, you get it into the clinic, you get it through phase 1. Depending on the funding environment at the time, you might get to phase 2. But to blow it out past that is just so enormous and so expensive. It's really, really hard to get a funding runway of $500 million to actually take a product commercial. And
Have you
so,
noticed? Sorry, go
go
ahead.
ahead. Yeah.
Have you noticed? It's funny you say that because what I noticed in the news right now is some of these smaller companies are even cutting back on their pipeline to extend their cash, right? So that they have
Yeah.
more cash to be able to do what they need to
Yeah.
do. And those that can't quite do that seem to be when they really do get in some, let's say, not horrible financial trouble, but when they really get strapped there,
Hmm.
the bigger guys are coming in and kind of taking them over, right? They're not
Yeah.
necessarily partnering, but it seems like they're kind of waiting to see if they can actually just acquire at a better, perhaps at a better
Yeah.
price.
I mean, there's a lot of models. Yeah, sure. Which is, you'll just take over an asset from a company, um, and you might partner with them on moving it into like the next phase. It usually happens between phase one and phase two. Sometimes it happens prior to getting into humans, but generally not. Usually, companies like the big pharma wants to see that the product can actually be registered with the FDA to be in a clinical trial, and that it gets through phase one, which is basically about safety.
Hmm.
And if they've shown that the product's safe, and if the science says the product's going to work, that's when the bigger companies will say, okay, we'll partner with you to take this forward. And that's usually when things get super expensive also. Like going from phase one to phase two is just an order of magnitude more expensive.
Right.
So
And
what
then
it
phase
looks like,
three.
it's like a normal kind of path to exit, if you will,
Yeah.
for the smaller companies in the space, right?
Yeah, I've never worked in a small biotech, so I don't know if going in they've kind of designed their business model to plan for an exit. I think to be honest, most of them are setting themselves up to be a platform in that they have a technology that they think can be used across multiple products, or is either it's applicable to multiple therapeutic areas, the same product, or it's a type of technology to create multiple products across multiple therapeutic areas. And so they'll prove the concept in two or three products, sometimes more than that. But then, as Anthony, as you said, they to actually get it through to even to phase one is quite a large investment. And you know, you're not, especially in the biotech environment today, you're not going to get too many. I mean, they still occur, but you're not getting 200, $300 million funding rounds right now.
Right.
And that's what you need to do a phase one plus trial, right? And if you try to do that with two or three products, it's more people, it's more intense. You got to set up you have to set up GMP manufacturing, you have to set up like a supply chain. You have to set up a clinical operations relationship with a CRO, and so all of that costs money. And so I think probably small startup biotechs are planning to exit through big pharma, but I'm
Hmm.
sure a lot of them want to start the company and say we're gonna be the company that commercializes this product.
Mm.
Yeah.
That's what I would be in have my head if I was one of these scientists that's doing this. But I think the reality comes around eventually, and then they realize that to make this happen successfully, you're going to have a partner.
That actually complements your earlier comment about being a very open-minded when building the systems around and making the systems flexible enough, because that kind of allows you then down the road to kind of proceed with what you want to do in the
Yeah.
future.
I mean, that's another good topic to discuss, is that when you ever any kind of merger and acquisition of any kind, whether it's taking over a company or taking over a product from a company, an asset, always comes with a systems challenge associated with it, right? Because it's highly
Hmm.
unlikely that the
Oh yeah.
company you're buying is going to be running the same system that you're running. And the company that's the buyer is going to be the ones that determine what gets used going forward most of the time. Um, Small companies, definitely in the biotech space, they very seldom get to the level of where they are starting to implement an ERP system. I've seen it a few times. It's usually Netscape. Sometimes they'll go with SAP Cloud, but that's very, very rare. Those are the ones that are much more like have been around a little longer and are more better funded, more mature.
Hmm.
Usually there's no systems at all. It's all spreadsheets. And there's a like they might use just the financials of Netscape and nothing else to do their financials, right? There's always a financial package, but for operations, supply chain, for manufacturing, there's usually nothing. And that's usually okay because the scale is quite small at that stage. So, it's probably even the right thing to do is to not get fully into a system, with the exception of cell therapies that are autologous. And then you have this challenge of chain of identity where, like, the life of the patient is actually dependent on your ability to manage chain of identity. And
Hmm.
then I think, personally, I would not like to take the risk of managing a process, even for 50 patients in a small trial, without a system that's robustly protecting chain of identity throughout this very complicated supply chain and
Right.
manufacturing process.
It's funny when one talks about systems, just the word itself, it always strikes me as that, oh, this is big and it's going to be
Yeah.
expensive and it's going to be. I mean, one of the things that we try to do is to actually help folks maybe not necessarily get onto a spreadsheet because that has some inherent problems, but to use, I'll say, technology in a way that fits where they are in their particular
Hmm.
stage of the life cycle without over investing. Because what I think some of the stuff that we've noticed is, the software, um, the software paradigm isn't quite caught up to, at least in our space, the cell and gene space, to where it needs to be able to handle this flexibility and at a low enough cost per patient.
Hmm.
Sometimes the systems are extremely expensive on a per patient basis, right?
Yeah.
As they run through the
Yeah.
life cycle. And I think that also will eventually help them, when they do get acquired, right? As part of the due diligence package, do you have at least the right systems in place? And do you have something that we can easily absorb when we do acquire you?
It's actually two ways. You're right about that. And I know this because I'm working on some evaluations of companies for the company that I'm working for now. And, we look at that, what you just said, but really what we're looking at is, do they have a process in place to actually manage, do they know how to manage their product? And that might
Hmm.
mean a system that supports it, or it might mean just really good procedures with spreadsheets and well written procedures. But we really, from the operational evaluation of an asset that you might want to partner with or acquire, you definitely want to make sure that they know what they're doing, that they manage the end-to-end process really well. And ideally that's with a system. But then if it is with a system, it's like I said previously, it's highly unlikely that it's going to be the system we're using. So there's still going to be some pain in either, you'll have to make this decision at some stage of, we have to replace their system with our system, or you have to run two systems in parallel, which is probably even more painful. So
Yeah.
Right. For a
at some
little
point
while
you
or
have to
something.
take it over, right? So
I mean, that's the other thing is system doesn't always necessarily mean technology, right? It could
no,
be a well-run process that's
It's a
actually
process.
handled
It could be a
in a
process.
smart way.
I mean technically a spreadsheet is software, right? So
Yes.
Technically, it is, of course. Yeah. So, in your new role that you just started, so you do actually look at possible acquisition targets and
yeah, it's sort of a side
different
gig. I've
partnerships
I've
or.
been involved in three or four evaluations, due diligence as we call them, of potential targets in the cell and gene space. And
Mm.
I mean, if you look at the portfolio and you look at how this company has evolved, a significant amount of the assets that actually get to commercial status, and that's not just in the cell and gene space, started out somewhere else. And
Right.
it's actually part of the research and development strategy that there's a big outward looking machine that is evaluating what all the biotechs are doing. And then you look at what fits your portfolio, what's the direction that you want to go from a research standpoint into the commercial potential of these therapies. And then, yeah, so that's a big part of what big pharma does, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you
It
have a
sounds
glimpse. Sorry, you have a glimpse to the future. What do you think? Is the future bright in the cell and gene space?
Oh yeah, no question about it.
Uh,
I have zero doubts that it is where most, especially in the oncology and sort of the autoimmune space, from what I've been seeing there, the new therapies that actually impact people's lives into the future are going to be cell and gene therapy.
That's great to hear.
yes. So I wanted to go back for a second to something that you brought up. So it sounds like if you were just starting out, let's say at a biotech, I'm hearing that get your process done right first,
Mm-hmm.
and then figure out the systems that are going to support it, which is pretty tried and true. But it sounds like really that's where people need to focus, and maybe they don't always focus in that way.
Yeah, I think they don't. Just and again, having the experience of sort of getting under the hood of some small biotechs or even not so small, but we're looking at one or two assets out of a portfolio of five or six assets that they have. Um, there tends to be, in my experience with this, there tends to be a lack of thinking forward to how they're going to scale this thing. And part of that is because their priority is just figuring out how to make it at all. And but what happens is that, and this is kind of getting off the systems discussion, but what happens is that sometimes you focus so hard on how you're going to make a product that and just solve the science. Like the science is really hard to solve. And then but they're not thinking about, are we solving the science in a way that we can actually scale this in any meaningful way to go from
Mhm.
a clinical trial that's going to be 200 patients to a commercial launch where you need to have a capacity for 2,000 patients or 10,000 patients. And so bringing it back to the systems discussion, part of that scale planning is, okay, we can't just buy the raw materials off a spreadsheet. We can't manage manufacturing with a paper batch record. We can't manage our supply chain, ordering and our chain of identity and chain of custody and our delivery transparency to treatment centers. We can't manage that with emails and spreadsheets. And so at some point you have to start planning for how are you going to engage with the treatment centers? How are you going to engage with the couriers that are, because all of our products are handled at normally ultra cold chain conditions, which means more intense sort of supply chain management and specialty couriers and specialty handling at the manufacturing end and at the treatment center end, and engagement with the treatment centers for them to understand how to handle these products. You're also dealing with patients that are on a short timeline. So then, turnaround time is super critical.
Right.
And because turnaround time is super critical, transparency about what's happening throughout the process is super critical to the treatment center, to the treatment team, because they have to do things with this patient prior to the use of the therapy almost always in cell and gene therapies. There's always some
Mhm.
pre-treatment that comes as part of the treatment regimen, and they want to know when to plan for that, and they plan for that based on when they're going to get the therapy from us. And so all of that screams you need systems to support that.
Right. So leaving systems aside for a second, what advice would you give folks about that scalability problem that you identified, even outside of the systems?
Oof. Um, it's a
Did
big
I get
it's a
did
big
I get
question.
you? Did I?
So um, I think you just have to you have to break it up in, it's a big problem, so you have to break it up into small parts, right? Like you can't
Mhm.
just solve the problem. So you have to break up what are the it's
I
really
guess first you have to realize that it's even a problem and that you should be
yeah.
thinking about it.
I mean, yeah, you have to kind of do a model, right? Okay, we've finally figured out we can make this product. We've seen in our animal models or whatever they're using to move into clinical trials, or they've already gotten now to like a phase 1, and they're doing like their safety run up. So they're now treating, they got an IND filed and approved. Fantastic. They've treated 10 patients. Once you're at that stage, and your safety profile is showing no problems, double fantastic. So then once you're at that stage, that's when you really seriously have to think about, okay, how long does it take us to make this? How much does it cost us to make this? What's the capacity that we have to make it? And including in the make it, all the, do we have the right suppliers for the raw materials? Do we have the right category of raw material? Is it GMP materials, the ones that need to be GMP? In most cases, in preclinical and phase one, it's not. But at some point, it has to transition over to that. Are the suppliers big enough to supply us for 10x or 100x? Are other business partners big enough to support us? And then is our own, what's it going to take us if we've got 20 people in manufacturing to do manufacturing for 20 patients over a period of 3 months? What's it going to take to have 20 patients in a week, right? And that's because that's what you have to scale to. It's like 20 a week, and 20 a week's not even, that's only 1,000 patients a year, right? Now double that, like a typical therapy in the cell and gene space is doing at least 2,000 or 4,000. So that just becomes, and this is all slot manufacturing generally. So then you just start doing the math, and it's, 7 slots a day, 7 days a week is 2,500 patients. So if you go to 5,000 patients, you got to figure out how are you going to accommodate 14 slots a day, 7 days a week, and just keep going and going and going. And one of the big challenges of the cell and gene space is that the manufacturing doesn't scale up. Like it's because it's all very, especially on autologous therapies, but and the reason, well, multiple reasons, but all of the focus right now in the cell therapy space is to transition from autologous therapies that have shown, at least in blood cancers, to be super successful and super like really game changing, truly game changing. But they're super expensive. They take a long time to manufacture throughout the entire sort of end-to-end process. The patients are very sick and sometimes end up dying waiting for the therapy, which is, just
tragic.
That's a catastrophe. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's happening. It takes a lot of time to scale out this type of manufacturing. So one of the ways this is being addressed is that there's, I don't know, hundreds of companies looking at, can you manufacture this same CAR T therapy, in this case, from a healthy donor and manufacture multiple batches, 50 batches, 100 batches, so that you can treat 50 or 100 patients with one manufacturing run, which then cuts your cost by many, many orders of magnitude, puts the product on the shelf in a cryo freezer, and you can treat the patient in less than a week, right? Instead of 30 days or 40 days, which is typical right now. So that it addresses the scale of manufacturing, it addresses the cost of manufacturing, it addresses the turnaround time. Those are the three biggest problems with these therapies right now. And that's where all the money's going right now.
Very interesting points you're making there. And manufacturing looks like it's something that is definitely controllable within the companies, right? So this is a controllable factor within the companies. But there's also an external kind of non-controllable factor in here, specifically with logistics part. Are the logistics companies, courier companies, are ready, in your opinion, in this environment to continuously service and obviously service with scaling in mind, right?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think they've actually demonstrated that they can, because there's really only 3 players in the space, and for the most part, and you've seen now 5 companies, I think, have commercial approvals for autologous cell therapies, primarily all in the same space, various versions of lymphoma and different blood cancers, because that's where it's shown the easiest efficacy, let's say. So it's gone from, when Novartis launched Kymriah in 2017, I think it was probably 500 patients the first year, if that. I'm just making these numbers up. It was a very small. It was a pretty slow ramp up, but it ramped up pretty quickly. But then you had, Kite came immediately afterwards. Then BMS came. Then Legend came. So J&J Legend. So now I think you have, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but you've gone from a clinical, multiple companies doing small clinical trials to at least 4 commercial companies now globally doing 20,000 patients a year. So the couriers have scaled to the level of being able to do 20,000 deliveries a year to treatment centers. And it's probably max 300 or 400 treatment centers around the world where all of these patients are going. But that's still a pretty complicated supply chain. This is a global supply chain, probably going to 30 or 35 countries, 300 to 400 treatment centers in those 35 countries. And it's everywhere. It's every continent. And it's mostly coming from the United States, although there is significant manufacturing footprints in Europe as well. And so the supply chain, the couriers and the companies that are also part of this whole infrastructure, this network, the companies that are making the dewars that are the liquid nitrogen shipping containers, the all the materials that you need for these products have all successfully scaled. Like there hasn't actually, honestly, the problem with these therapies still today is more manufacturing constraints than it is other constraints like supply chain or materials. Materials is always a problem though, because usually, and that's one of the things you have to kind of be super careful about early on, is there's a lot of single source suppliers that you kind of end up stuck with that, by definition, you have no flexibility, and that's always a huge risk. And there have been supply problems because of the immaturity of the industry and the fairly rapid growth and the time it takes to grow these things in the controlled environment that we operate in, which we have to operate in, is just, it takes years to ramp up manufacturing, for example. So that's always going to be a challenge with these therapies. We're a long, long way away from being kind of a mature business. We're still an extremely immature business.
Yeah, of course, and there's all sorts of different applications for cell and gene therapies, right? Not just
it grows by the day,
all the time, all over the place.
The targets that they're going after literally increase every day. So
well, I know we've been talking for a little more than a half an hour, so I want to be respectful of your time, but I do appreciate you joining us this Friday here.
My pleasure.
Yeah, no, it was really, it was really good. There's a lot more we could obviously talk about as this thing kind of unfolds.
It's a complicated, interesting topic.
I was about to say that I have so many questions for you. This is very, very insightful and very interesting conversation. Would love to kind of ask a lot more questions, but obviously want to be courteous about the time and stuff. But
Andy, remind me, what is your new title now?
I'm head of, I don't know, head of cell and gene therapies product management. And I have a team of what we call value chain product leads, which are kind of they kind of work within all of, so we define the supply chain as the value chain, actually. And the reason for that is because it includes the interface to the treatment centers, which is super critical. It's the traditional supply chain functions of planning and logistics and materials management and so forth. And then it's the the other operations around how you manage end-to-end operations, from bringing materials into the manufacturing, and then, which is a key element of these types of therapies, and then taking the drug product from the manufacturing and getting it to these, like I said, 300 treatment centers around the world. that's a highly complicated process that requires a lot of very close interaction at the treatment team level, at the physician and the physician's treatment team. Um, because at the end of the day, everything we do, and this is what makes it super exciting to be in this business, is everything we do is a single patient. Every activity we do is like one patient. And we know what we're doing impacts one patient. So that makes you very focused on what you're doing, but it also adds a lot of complexity, right? And
Yeah.
it goes back to all the discussion we just had about it, scaling and
Yeah. So you're going to be focused mostly then in the US, is that right? Like out
no,
here?
it's a global business. I mean, the way we're organized, our sort of cell therapy and individualized therapy business is kind of just for a variety of reasons, the epicenter is in South San Francisco. Our gene therapy business is more European focused. And so there's kind of a natural split that way, but both businesses are global. So I'm not focused just on the US by any means.
All right. Well, it was great talking to you. I really appreciate you spending time with us. It's always a good time when when
thanks
we're
for the
able
invite, and happy to join anytime.
And it's great to meet you. So what did you think, Anthony? How did that
I
go?
think Andy's awesome. I've always enjoyed working with him. Like I said before, I think I've known him for about maybe 4 years or so now since he came out from the East Coast to the West Coast. And no, I mean, he has a wealth of knowledge, and I could have asked a bunch more questions on a lot of different topics.
I
So we'll have
agree.
to do a part 2, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. I think definitely part 2 should be in works, because I had also a ton of questions that I wanted to kind of put forward, but we have to be respectful of his time. A very insightful conversation.
Yeah, definitely. All right, man. Well,
Right?
I enjoyed it. Have a good weekend, and I will see you next week.
Yes, absolutely. Bye.
All right. Bye.
Subscribe for more insights from leading CGT experts.